in the heart of the ancient kingdom of Silla, a land where the mountains touch the sky and the rivers wind like serpents. There was a queen whose name would forever be etched into the annals of history. Her story was not only one of political ambition and royal duty, but also one of quiet resilience and a woman's place within a realm of men. Queen Seonhwa, born as the daughter of a powerful general and a future queen, was destined to be more than a mere pawn in the kingdom's grand designs. She was to become a symbol of the strength and wisdom that lay within the heart of Silla, the mother of a king, and a figure whose legacy would shape the very future of the three kingdoms of Korea. The year was 635, and Silla, though powerful, still stood at the crossroads of history, caught between the rivalries of the mighty kingdoms of Beich and Goguryeo, with the distant but growing influence of China looming over the horizon. The winds of change blew constantly, carrying whispers of war, alliances, and the dreams of a unified peninsula. Seonhwa's earliest memories were of the court, the endless whispers of noble men and women, the rustling of silks, the clinking of jade, and the weight of royal expectations. Born into the illustrious Kim family, her father, Kim Yushin, was not only a famed warrior but a man whose name struck fear into the hearts of enemies. His fame as a general was unmatched, and his ambition to see Silla rise above its rivals was unparalleled. Seonhwa grew up in the shadow of his great achievements, her destiny bound to his vision of a powerful and united Silla. But while history often remembers the victories of kings and generals, the quiet stories of the women behind them are often forgotten. Seonhwa, though born into nobility and groomed for greatness, did not find her path laid out before her in the same way that her father's was. She was a daughter, a sister, and eventually, a queen, roles that seemed predetermined. Yet she would come to find that her true power would lie not in her bloodline, but in the decisions she made and the alliances she forged. As a young girl, Seonhwa's heart was filled with dreams of adventure, of seeing the world beyond the palace walls. She longed to understand the intricacies of power and the art of diplomacy, though such thoughts were often hidden behind the layers of tradition and decorum expected of royal women. Her future would be shaped by the man she was to marry, King Munmu, whose name was already becoming known in every corner of the kingdom. It was a marriage of alliance, a union designed to solidify Silla's power and ensure the kingdom's future. Yet, like all great unions, it would come to define both of their legacies, forging a partnership that would change the course of history. Seonhwa's story began long before her coronation as queen, before her name became known as a symbol of wisdom, grace, and strength. It began in the chambers of her childhood, with the lessons of loyalty, honor, and the weight of royal blood, each teaching her not only what it meant to be a ruler, but what it meant to be a woman within a kingdom of men. Her path, though forged by others, was hers to walk, and as she took her first steps toward her destiny, she could not have known the trials and triumphs that awaited her. What she did know was that in a world where the heavens seemed to control the fate of men, she would carve out her own place in history. Her name, Seonhwa, would one day echo through the halls of Silla as a testament to the power of a queen who, though often unseen, was always at the heart of it all. And so, the story of Queen Seonhwa begins not just as a queen, but as a woman whose life and choices would forever alter the fate of her kingdom. The winds of change were already stirring, and Silla, under her guidance, would one day see its place in the world rewritten. The sun rose over the distant mountains of Silla, casting long shadows across the ancient city of Gyeongju, the capital of the kingdom. The morning mist clung to the edges of the hills, wrapping them in a veil of mystery, as if the land itself whispered secrets from centuries past. In the royal palace, the sound of bells rang out, signaling the start of another day. It was a day like any other, but for one young girl, it marked the beginning of a journey that would take her beyond the palace walls and into the annals of history. Her name was Seonhwa, born in the year 635. Seonhwa was the daughter of one of the most renowned generals in Silla, Kim Yushin, a man whose name was spoken with reverence across the three kingdoms. Her mother, Lady Suro, came from a noble family with a legacy of grace and wisdom, and from the moment Seonhwa could walk, she was groomed for a life of power. Yet, she was far from the stereotypical princess one might expect. Her heart did not long for luxury alone, nor did she seek to be a mere ornament in the court of kings. Seonhwa was a child of vision and ambition, and though her royal birth set the stage for a future of great influence, her path was not so easily charted. As a girl, Seonhwa spent her days in the court, surrounded by the opulence of the royal palace. The scent of incense filled the air, and the laughter of nobles and courtiers echoed through the marble halls. She was a quiet observer, her dark eyes taking in everything around her, the hushed conversations, the subtle glances exchanged between advisors, and the weight of unspoken words that carried more power than the ones spoken aloud. It was a world where knowledge was a weapon, and Seonhwa was learning to wield it. Her father, Kim Yushin, was a man of great strength, both on the battlefield and in the court. His victories in battle had earned him the respect of the people, and his influence in the royal court was second only to the king himself. Seonhwa knew that one day, she would have to follow in the footsteps of her father, though she did not yet understand the full weight of that responsibility. As she grew, her father would teach her the art of diplomacy, the intricacies of statecraft, and the delicate balance of power that shaped the kingdom of Silla. But Seonhwa's destiny would not be determined solely by her father. The palace was filled with whispers of alliances, of marriages that held the power to shift the balance of the kingdom. The three kingdoms, Silla, Betrayal, and Goguryeo, were locked in an eternal struggle for supremacy, each one seeking to outmaneuver the others. And in this world of shifting allegiances, marriage was often the most powerful weapon of all. When Seonhwa turned 14, her life took a sudden and unexpected turn. King Munmu, the young ruler of Silla, came to the palace to speak with her father, Kim Yushin. It was a meeting that would set the course for the future of the kingdom. And for Seonhwa herself, Munmu was not yet king by birthright but had ascended to the throne after the death of his father. King Take, the young monarch, was known for his ambition and his desire to unite the fragmented three kingdoms under the banner of Silla. But Silla's position was precarious, and the alliances it made would be crucial in determining whether the kingdom would survive the growing threats from both Goguryeo to the north and Betrayal to the west. It was then that Seonhwa's life became intertwined with the fate of the kingdom. Her father, who had long been an advocate for the unity of the three kingdoms under Silla's banner, saw the potential in a union between his daughter and King Munmu. It would solidify their family's power, strengthen the royal line, and create a bond that would secure Silla's future. Though the marriage was politically arranged, Seonhwa felt a stirring in her heart, a sense of duty to her kingdom and to her people. She had heard of King Munmu before, of his leadership and his determination to unite the kingdom, and she was not blind to the importance of the alliance. But there was a part of Seonhwa that questioned this future. She had grown up watching the inner workings of the royal court, observing the delicate dance of politics, and she knew that even the most powerful unions could be fraught with dangers. Would she, as queen, be able to wield the influence that her father had? Or would she be nothing more than a figurehead, a pawn in the hands of the men who ruled the kingdom? The decision was not hers to make. Her father spoke of the arrangement with the seriousness that only a seasoned general could. This marriage will not just unite two families. It will unite a kingdom. It is not just your duty, Seonhwa, but your destiny. There was a weight in his voice, and for the first time, Seonhwa realized the full scope of the life that awaited her. She was not just a daughter of Kim Yushin, nor merely the future queen of Silla. She was a symbol, a bridge between two worlds, and the future of her kingdom would rest, in part, upon her shoulders. In the days that followed, Seonhwa met with King Munmu in private, as was customary before a royal betrothal. He was a man of few words, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and calm. betraying no hint of the ambition that simmered beneath the surface. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were sharp and calculating. Yet there was a kindness in them that Seonhwa found intriguing. He seemed to understand the weight of the marriage as much as she did. And there was a quiet respect between them, though neither dared speak of it aloud. Their union, though born of necessity, would evolve into something more. Over time, Seonhwa came to see in Munmu not just the king she was expected to serve, but a partner in the grand endeavor of securing Silla's future. Their conversations, though few, were filled with shared ambition and the realization that the success of their reign would depend on their ability to work together, to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. The royal wedding took place in the grand hall of the palace, with the entire court in attendance. Seonhwa, dressed in the finest silks and adorned with the jewels of her ancestors, stood before the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She was no longer just the daughter of Kim Yushin. She was now the queen of Silla, bound by duty, bound by fate. As the ceremony concluded and the courtiers dispersed, Seonhwa stood by her husband's side, her gaze drifting over the sea of faces. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the burden of history pressing down on her. But in that moment, she knew that her journey had only just begun. The kingdom of Silla was on the brink of something great, and she, along with her husband, would lead it into a new era. What lay ahead would not be easy, and Seonhwa knew that the road to power was fraught with challenges. But as she looked at King Munmu, she felt a flicker of hope. Together, they would carve a new future for Silla, one that would stand strong against the storms of war and the tides of change. And in the quiet recesses of her heart, Seonhwa made a silent vow to herself. She would not be a mere figurehead. She would be a queen who would shape the destiny of her kingdom. The winds of change were already stirring in the east, and the kingdom of Silla would soon find itself at the heart of the storm. But Seonhwa was ready. The first days of Seonhwa's marriage were marked by the whispers of the court. Her wedding to King Munmu had been a spectacle of grandeur, an event that filled the palace with celebration and promises of a brighter future for the kingdom of Silla. But beyond the gilded halls and the royal feasts, there was a new world to navigate, one where her every move would be scrutinized, and her every word weighed for its political significance. The days following the ceremony were strange for Seonhwa. She was no longer just the daughter of Kim Yushin, nor the betrothed of a powerful prince. She was Queen of Silla, the partner of King Munmu, a title that carried with it not only the allure of power but also its burdens. Seonhwa's life had been carefully planned, her role outlined long before she ever set foot in the palace as a young girl. Yet now, standing at the threshold of her future, she found herself unsure of what exactly her role would be. In the early days of her marriage, Seonhwa spent much of her time in the royal chambers, awaiting the guidance of her husband, the king. King Munmu, though a man of few words, was a leader whose presence filled any room he entered. His calm demeanor, the sharpness of his gaze, and the quiet confidence in his decisions were qualities that commanded respect. Yet, in their private moments, Seonhwa began to notice the weight of the crown upon him. Munmu was not simply a king. He was a man struggling to unite a fragmented kingdom, torn between internal strife and external threats. It became clear to Seonhwa that her husband's desire for a united Korea was not born of personal ambition alone. It was a necessity for the survival of Silla itself. As the queen, she understood that her role was not just ceremonial. She would be called upon to support his vision, to provide counsel, and, above all, to bear the weight of a kingdom in the throes of change. The royal chambers, though filled with riches, felt cold to Seonhwa at first. She had always been close to her father, learning from him the intricacies of court life, the subtle shifts in power, and the balance between strength and diplomacy. But now, as queen, she found herself struggling to adapt. She was surrounded by advisors who deferred to King Munmu, yet her own voice seemed muted, lost in the din of royal politics. What had once been her natural confidence in the palace now seemed to falter, as if the weight of her new responsibilities was too much for a young woman to bear. Despite her internal conflict, Seonhwa was determined to find her place in the royal court. She was not just a political pawn in the game of power. She had something more to offer. It was her intuition that would prove invaluable in the coming years. For she could read the currents of court intrigue as easily as she could read the faces of those around her. She knew that power in Silla was not just about military might or the strength of alliances. It was about perception, trust, and the ability to maneuver behind the scenes. One afternoon, after a particularly long council meeting, Seonhwa and King Munmu found themselves alone in the royal garden. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden light on the tranquil pond. The king stood by the water, his expression distant as he gazed at the reflections of the trees on the surface. "Do you ever wonder, my queen," Munmu began, his voice quiet, "if the weight of our destiny is more than we can bear?" Seonhwa stepped closer, her hands folded in front of her. She could feel the heaviness of his words in her chest, though she chose not to show it. "I do not know, Your Majesty," she replied softly, "but I know that we must carry it. There is no other choice." Munmu turned to face her, his gaze piercing yet filled with something softer, a fleeting vulnerability. "I see in you, Seonhwa, not just the queen, but a woman who understands the true cost of this throne. I would not have chosen anyone else by my side." Seonhwa bowed her head in respect, though her thoughts swirled. The king was not a man who easily showed his feelings, and his words, though brief, held weight. They had both been thrust into this role by necessity, by the grand design of their forebears, and though their marriage was not built on love in the traditional sense, it was founded on a shared purpose. They both sought to secure Silla's place in the world, to protect their kingdom from the threats that loomed on the horizon. Yet as the days passed, Seonhwa began to realize the complexity of her position. It was not just the political marriage that she had to navigate, but also the inner workings of the court itself. There were factions within the palace, some loyal to the king, others to the influential generals, and still others who sought their own gain. Power was a delicate thing in Silla, and though her father's reputation as a warrior and tactician had ensured her place in the royal court, Seonhwa could not rely solely on his legacy. She had to learn the art of persuasion, to understand the shifting allegiances of the court. In the evenings, when King Munmu retired to his study, Seonhwa would often sit in the quiet of the royal chambers, reflecting on the day's events. She began to take note of the subtle signs of discontent among the nobles, whispers in the corridors, the shifting alliances between generals, the sly glances exchanged during council meetings. It was a delicate dance, and Seonhwa was learning how to navigate it with care. In one of their rare moments of solitude, Seonhwa approached her husband as he studied the maps of Silla and its neighboring kingdoms. "Munmu," she began, her voice firm, "there are those in the court who would seek to undermine our rule. I hear whispers, small, but persistent." King Munmu looked up from his maps, his brow furrowing in thought. "I know, my queen, the kingdom is on the brink of something great, but that also means the envy of our enemies grows stronger. We cannot afford to show weakness." Seonhwa's eyes met his, her voice steady. "We must be cautious, Your Majesty, and we must choose our allies wisely." Munmu nodded, his gaze softening. "You are right. I will trust you, Seonhwa. Together, we will navigate this court, as we must navigate this kingdom." It was in these moments of quiet conversation that Seonhwa began to understand the depth of her husband's character. His strength lay not only in his military might, but in his ability to recognize when to act and when to wait. He was a king who understood the nuances of power, and in her, he saw an equal, someone who could help him secure Silla's future. As the weeks turned into months, Seonhwa's place in the royal court became clearer. She was not just the queen in name, but a partner in the governance of Silla. Her counsel, though subtle, was valued by Munmu, and over time, she gained the respect of the court. She was a queen who spoke not just with authority, but with wisdom, a queen who knew that true power was not in command alone but in the ability to listen, to understand, and to act when the moment was right. The kingdom was on the cusp of a great change. The threat of invasion loomed, and Silla's future rested not only on the strength of its armies but on the alliances it could forge, the trust it could build. And in this uncertain time, Seonhwa knew that her role was more vital than ever. She was no longer just the young girl who had been betrothed to the king. She was a queen whose decisions would echo through the corridors of time. Her betrothal to Munmu was more than a political arrangement. It was the beginning of a partnership that would shape the future of Silla. And Seonhwa was ready to stand by her husband, not just as a queen, but as a leader in her own right. The kingdom of Silla stood on the precipice of a new era. Under King Munmu's leadership and with Seonhwa at his side, the dream of a unified Korean peninsula seemed within reach. But the path to that vision was fraught with peril. As the distant thunder of war echoed across the horizon, the fragile alliances Silla had cultivated would soon be tested in ways neither Seonhwa nor Munmu could have anticipated. It was a time when the balance of power was shifting, and every decision, every alliance, would have lasting consequences. The early days of Seonhwa's marriage to Munmu had been filled with delicate diplomacy and quiet observation. But as the seasons passed, the calm was broken by the rumblings of war. Silla's northern neighbor, Goguryeo, had long been a threat, its military might and territorial ambitions a constant worry. And to the west, Beech, though not as powerful as it once was, remained a potential adversary. Between these two great powers, Silla found itself in a precarious position, caught between rivals, its borders vulnerable and its fate uncertain. The turning point came in the year 642, when news arrived of a large-scale invasion from the north. Goguryeo, under its new ruler, King Yeonjiang, had begun massing troops along the northern frontier. The kingdom's formidable armies had crossed the border into Silla territory, intent on claiming strategic lands that lay within Silla's grasp. The time for diplomacy was over, the time for action had come. King Munmu, though young, was resolute. His leadership was tested as never before, and it was clear that the survival of Silla rested on his shoulders. Seonhwa, always by his side, had seen this day coming. The threats had been growing more urgent, the warnings more dire. Yet, despite the intelligence and the reports from her father's allies, the reality of an invasion was something that struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest men and women in the kingdom. Seonhwa's role in these early days of war was not that of a mere observer. Though she was a queen and not a general, her understanding of the political landscape was invaluable. She worked tirelessly with King Munmu, advising him on matters of diplomacy and counsel, particularly when it came to dealing with internal threats. Silla's noble houses, though largely loyal to the crown, were not immune to greed and ambition. There were always factions within the court that would take advantage of any perceived weakness. One evening, as the moonlight bathed the palace in silver, Seonhwa and Munmu stood together in the royal garden, the air thick with tension. "We cannot afford to lose this war, Seonhwa," Munmu said, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "If we do, the future of Silla will be compromised. Goguryeo will sweep through the kingdom, and Beech will follow. Our people will be scattered, and everything we've worked for will be for naught." Seonhwa felt a surge of determination as she looked at her husband. Though she shared his concern, she knew there was more at stake than just military victory. Silla needed unity, and unity could only be forged through alliances that would hold the kingdom together in its darkest hour. "We must strengthen our alliances," Seonhwa said quietly, her mind racing. "Goguryeo cannot be allowed to have the upper hand. You must send emissaries to the Tang dynasty in China. Their support will be critical. If we can secure a military alliance, we may be able to turn the tide." Munmu paused, considering her words. "You're right," We've been too focused on the internal struggles. The enemy at the gates is not just Goguryeo. It's the broader regional power structure. If we do not act now, we may be facing a war on multiple fronts. The next weeks were filled with intense preparation. Munmu mobilized the armies, sending his best generals to the northern borders, while Seonhwa worked diligently behind the scenes to solidify Silla's alliances. She sent trusted diplomats to the Tang court, offering promises of trade, tribute, and military support in exchange for aid in Silla's time of need. Her diplomatic efforts were not without opposition. Several high-ranking officials, including some of the more conservative members of the royal court, questioned the wisdom of aligning with China. Silla had long prided itself on its independence, and some feared that relying on foreign powers would weaken the kingdom's sovereignty. But Seonhwa knew that the survival of Silla depended on the strength of these alliances. As the northern border saw more clashes, with Silla's forces struggling to hold back the Goguryeo invaders, Seonhwa's diplomatic efforts began to bear fruit. The Tang dynasty, recognizing the potential for a unified Silla to serve as a counterweight to Goguryeo's growing influence, agreed to provide military support. It was a tenuous alliance, one that would require delicate balance, but it gave Seonhwa a sense of hope. The forces of Silla, now bolstered by Tang support, would be able to stand against the northern invasion. The battle at the northern border, however, would not be easily won. As reports came in of the first skirmishes between Silla and Goguryeo forces, Seonhwa's thoughts turned to her father, Kim Yushin. He had long been one of the most respected generals in Silla, and Seonhwa knew that he would be leading the charge to defend the kingdom. The connection between them was deep. Father and daughter had shared many quiet moments discussing strategy and diplomacy, and Seonhwa knew that her father's strength would be crucial in the coming months. Yet even his skill and experience could not ensure victory if the odds were stacked too high. A week before the decisive battle was set to take place, Seonhwa received word from her father. His letter was brief, written in his signature bold script. The enemy approaches with great force. We will meet them at the northern pass. Victory is possible, but only if we stand firm. Hold the kingdom together. Seonhwa, our fate depends on it. Seonhwa read the letter again, her fingers trembling as she traced the ink. She knew what was at stake. This was no longer about power, this was about the survival of her people, the future of Silla. She could not afford to falter. Not now, not when everything was on the line. On the eve of the battle, King Munmu summoned Seonhwa to his chambers. The mood in the palace was grim, and the tension in the air was palpable. Munmu stood by the window, staring out into the night, his face shadowed by the weight of impending war. Seonhwa, he said quietly, turning to face her, I am sending my best generals to the northern front, but I fear this battle will be the test of Silla's very soul. If we fail, all is lost. I have faith in our warriors, but I need your counsel now more than ever. Seonhwa stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. Her voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes. We will win, Munmu, not just because of the strength of our armies, but because we fight for something more. We fight for the future of our kingdom, for the people of Silla. This war is not just a test of arms, it is a test of our will. Munmu looked into her eyes, his expression softening for a moment. He had long known Seonhwa was more than just a queen. She was his partner, his equal. Together, they would lead Silla through the storm. I will not fail, he said, his voice resolute. We will not fail. As the first light of dawn broke over the hills, the armies of Silla, bolstered by their Tang allies, prepared for the great confrontation. The winds of war were upon them, and Seonhwa could feel the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. She had done everything in her power to ensure that Silla was ready for this moment. Now, all they could do was wait for the battle to begin. The war with Goguryeo was not over quickly. The battles fought in the northern reaches of Silla were long and brutal, and the cost of each victory was high. when King Munmu's forces, bolstered by the support of Tang allies, finally confronted the Goguryeo army at the northern passes. It was a conflict unlike any Silla had faced before. The clash of steel echoed for days, a deafening roar that could be heard across the kingdom. But as the dust of battle settled, a clear victory emerged. Silla had managed to turn back the Goguryeo invasion, securing its northern border for the time being. For Seonhwa, the victory was bittersweet. She had seen the toll that war took on the land, the bloodshed, the lives lost. The celebrations that followed felt hollow compared to the images of the battlefield that lingered in her mind. Though the kingdom had been saved, the victory came at a great price. In the weeks following the battle, King Munmu returned to the palace to attend to matters of state. He had been deeply affected by the loss of so many of his best generals and soldiers. Though outwardly calm, his eyes betrayed the weight of the decisions he had made. Seonhwa, ever perceptive, saw through his stoic exterior. She knew that the man who stood before her was not just the king but a husband, a leader, and a man who bore the heavy burden of the kingdom's future. In the royal chambers, Seonhwa confronted her husband one evening as he gazed out at the stars from the palace balcony. The night air was cool, and the courtyard below was lit with the soft glow of lanterns. "Munmu," she said softly, stepping beside him, "the cost of this war, I know it weighs heavily on your heart, but we have won. The kingdom is safe for now." Munmu didn't turn to her immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the sky, as if searching for an answer among the stars. "It was too much, Seonhwa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Too many lives lost. I thought I could bear the burden of this crown, but I don't know if I can carry it alone." Seonhwa placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of both comfort and strength. "You are not alone," she said firmly. "I am here, and I will always stand by you. The burden of the crown may be heavy, but you do not have to bear it by yourself." King Munmu turned to her then, his eyes filled with the weariness of the past months. There was a moment of silence between them before he spoke again. "I know, Seonhwa," he said quietly. "I know, but it is not just the war that troubles me. There are forces within the court powerful, ambitious men who are always watching, waiting for a chance to seize control. The victory we've won today may be short-lived if we cannot secure the peace." Seonhwa understood the implications of his words. The court, though ostensibly loyal to the crown, was a battlefield of its own. There were those who sought to undermine King Munmu's rule, who plotted in the shadows, hoping to take advantage of any weakness. In the days that followed, Seonhwa found herself drawn deeper into the web of court politics. The nobles, once united under the banner of war, began to fragment into factions. Some were loyal to the king, others to the generals who had earned fame on the battlefield, and still others sought to gain favor with foreign powers, eager to secure their own position in the changing political landscape. Seonhwa had been raised to understand the intricacies of power, but even she was astonished at the machinations unfolding before her. Behind closed doors, alliances shifted like sand, and loyalty was a currency that changed hands with frightening speed. Her father, Kim Yushin, remained a trusted advisor, but even his influence was waning as new faces emerged within the royal court. It was clear that a new kind of power struggle was taking place, one that would require all of Seonhwa's diplomatic skills to navigate. One particular challenge came in the form of General Kim Il-sung, a prominent military leader who had played a key role in the battle against Goguryeo. Despite his success on the battlefield, his ambitions were becoming increasingly apparent. He had begun to build a faction of his own within the palace, drawing the loyalty of several influential nobles and even some of the lesser generals who had fought alongside him. Seonhwa saw the danger in Kim Il-sung's growing influence. Though he had earned his place through bravery, his ambitions were not so easily contained. His faction was well organized, and his support in the court was growing. If left unchecked, he could challenge Munmu's authority and destabilize the kingdom. One evening, Seonhwa found herself in a private meeting with her father, Kim Yushin, in the royal gardens. They sat on a stone bench beneath a canopy of trees, the moonlight filtering through the leaves. Though her father was not directly involved in the court's internal struggles, Seonhwa trusted him implicitly, and she knew that his experience would provide invaluable insight. "Father," Seonhwa began, her voice low, "there is talk in the court. General Kim Il-sung is gaining more power by the day. His supporters are many, and his influence is spreading. I fear that if we do not act, he could become a threat to the king's rule." Kim Yushin, ever the strategist, took a long moment before responding. His face was calm, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that Seonhwa had come to rely on. "Il-sung is a skilled general, no doubt," her father said, his tone measured, "but ambition without wisdom is a dangerous thing. He sees himself as the rightful heir to the power Munmu holds, and that will be his downfall. The court is filled with ambitious men, but loyalty to the crown must come first. We cannot afford to let these factions divide us." Seonhwa nodded, her mind already turning with plans. "We must act quickly. If we allow him to consolidate power, it may be too late to turn back." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You are right, but it is not just about removing a rival. It is about securing the stability of the kingdom. We must ensure that the support of the people, the generals, and the nobles remains with the king." Seonhwa was silent for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had seen her father navigate these treacherous waters for years, but the stakes had never been higher. The war may have been won, but the battle for the heart of Silla was far from over. In the coming days, Seonhwa began to act. She worked tirelessly to solidify her position in the court, meeting with key nobles and advisors who still supported Munmu's rule. She reached out to the generals who had fought alongside her father, reminding them of their loyalty to the king and the importance of keeping the kingdom united. But the tension in the court was palpable, and every conversation felt like a calculated move in a high-stakes game of strategy. At the same time, Seonhwa continued to support her husband, offering him counsel and guidance in matters of state. King Munmu, though deeply affected by the weight of leadership, began to rely more heavily on her advice. She had become not only his queen but his trusted advisor, and together they formed a formidable partnership. The threat of internal division was real, and Seonhwa knew that the coming months would determine the future of the kingdom. The cost of victory in war was high, but the cost of preserving peace, both in the court and across the kingdom, would be even higher. As the days turned into weeks, Seonhwa felt the pressure mounting. She had fought for Silla's survival on the battlefield, but now, in the halls of the palace, she would have to fight a different kind of battle, one of politics, power, and survival. But Seonhwa was not a woman who shied away from challenges. She had always known that power, in any form, was never easily won or easily held, and she was ready to do whatever it took to ensure that Silla would remain strong, united, and free. With the battle against Goguryeo now behind them, Silla's fate lay in the hands of its rulers, both on the battlefield and within the royal court. For Queen Seonhwa, the challenges were no longer just the external threats of war, but the insidious currents of power that threatened to tear apart the kingdom from within. The court, once united by the shared cause of defending the kingdom, had begun to fracture. Factions began to form, each seeking control, and alliances that were once unshakable began to dissolve in the face of ambition. The victory over Goguryeo had brought a temporary peace, but peace in the kingdom was as fragile as a delicate glass vase, fragile and easily shattered. The soldiers returned to their homes. The people resumed their lives, but in the shadow of the palace, the struggle for power was only just beginning. Seonhwa had done everything in her power to maintain stability, but even she could not have anticipated the far-reaching consequences of the political maneuvering that would follow. The most pressing issue was General Kim Il-sung, whose growing influence had started to alarm even Seonhwa's closest allies. though his successes in battle had won him the respect of the people and the soldiers. His increasing ambition posed a real threat to King Munmu's authority. With every passing day, Kim Il-sung's faction grew stronger. He had secured the loyalty of several influential generals, many of whom had been victorious in battle, and his supporters within the court were equally numerous. His words were calculated, his promises of a stronger, more unified Silla appealing to those who saw the kingdom's stability as tenuous. But Seonhwa saw through the general's charm. His desire for power was not just for the good of the kingdom, but for his own gain, and in his rise, Seonhwa could see a direct challenge to the throne, a challenge that could destroy the very unity the kingdom had fought so hard to achieve. It was a bitter truth, but one that Seonhwa could not ignore. Kim Il-sung was no mere military leader. He was a political force in his own right, and the stakes had risen. One evening, as she sat in the royal gardens, Seonhwa reflected on the situation. Her mind was sharp, her thoughts unwavering as she considered the choices ahead of her. The fate of the kingdom was inextricably tied to the delicate balance of power, and it was clear that King Munmu's position was at risk. Despite their victories, the growing factions threatened to destabilize everything they had fought for. Seonhwa. A voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see her father, Kim Yushin, approaching her. His face was grim, as it often was when serious matters needed to be discussed. "It seems we are approaching a crossroads." "Indeed, father," Seonhwa replied, her voice steady despite the urgency in her heart. "The situation grows more dangerous with every passing day. General Kim Il-sung's influence is rising, and he does not shy away from openly challenging the throne." Kim Yushin nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. His ambitions are clear, but he does not have the full support of the people. There are many in the court who are loyal to the crown, to Munmu, but you must act swiftly. Seonhwa, the longer this goes on, the more dangerous it becomes. Seonhwa knew that her father was right. The court was a delicate balance of power, and one wrong move could send everything spiraling into chaos. But taking action against Kim Il-sung, a hero in the eyes of many, was not a decision she could take lightly. It would not be a simple matter of removing a rival. It was a question of the kingdom's survival. The following days were filled with clandestine meetings and whispered conversations. Seonhwa knew she could not face this battle alone. She needed the support of the remaining loyal generals, those who had fought beside her father in the earlier wars. She also needed to reach out to the nobles who had not yet pledged allegiance to Kim Il-sung. But it was a delicate task, and one misstep could cost them everything. In the meantime, Seonhwa's relationship with King Munmu became more strained. Though they had always been partners in ruling the kingdom, the increasing pressure of the court and the looming threat of internal division weighed heavily on their marriage. Munmu, once a confident ruler, had become more withdrawn. His decisions, once swift and decisive, now seemed uncertain, as if the enormity of his position had begun to wear on him. He had always relied on Seonhwa's counsel, but now he seemed to question her every suggestion, every plan. Seonhwa had always seen her role as more than just that of a queen. She had stood by Munmu's side through countless trials. But now, more than ever, she felt the weight of his doubts pressing on her. His growing distance made it more difficult for her to sway his decisions, and she could see that the cracks in their partnership were beginning to widen. One evening, after yet another tense meeting with the court's advisors, Seonhwa found herself alone in her chambers. The walls, once filled with the warmth of their shared victories, now seemed cold and indifferent. She sat before her mirror, staring at her reflection, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her shoulders. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and she looked up to see a servant standing in the doorway. "Your Majesty," the servant said, bowing respectfully. "There is someone here to see you." Seonhwa nodded, unsure of who would be seeking her out at this hour. "Let them in." The door opened, and a familiar figure stepped into the room, General Kim Il-sung. His presence was commanding, his posture regal, and his face, as always, a mask of calculated charm. Seonhwa had known from the moment he entered that this was not a mere social call. He had come to make his intentions known. "Your Majesty," Kim Il-sung said, his voice smooth, "I trust one am not disturbing you." Seonhwa rose from her seat, her eyes never leaving his. "General, what brings you to my chambers at this hour?" Kim Il-sung's smile remained, but there was a sharpness to it now. "I come to discuss matters of great importance, matters that concern the future of Silla." He took a step closer, his tone shifting to one of quiet urgency. "You see, Your Majesty, the kingdom is at a crossroads, with the north secured, and the war against Goguryeo behind us. Now is the time for change. Silla needs a stronger leadership, one that is more decisive, more capable of bringing about true unity. I believe that, with my leadership, we can bring Silla into a new era." Seonhwa's heart quickened, but she kept her face impassive. She had known this day would come, the day when Kim Il-sung would make his play for power. But hearing it spoken aloud was another matter entirely. "And what exactly do you propose, General?" Seonhwa asked, her voice calm but laced with an underlying tension. Kim Il-sung's eyes gleamed, as if he had been waiting for her to ask. "I propose that you and I work together, Queen Seonhwa. Together, we can reshape the kingdom, secure its future, and ensure that Silla remains strong, no matter the cost." For a long moment, Seonhwa said nothing. The offer was not unexpected, but it was one she could never accept. She had sworn an oath to her husband, to the throne, to the people of Silla. There was no room for betrayal in her heart, not even for someone as powerful as Kim Il-sung. "I will not betray my husband, General," Seonhwa said quietly, her voice firm. "Nor will I stand by while you attempt to tear apart the kingdom we have worked so hard to build." Kim Il-sung's smile faded, and for the first time, Seonhwa saw the danger in his eyes. "You may regret this decision, Queen Seonhwa," he said softly. "The winds of change are coming, and not all of us will be able to weather them." With that, he turned and left, leaving Seonhwa alone with the weight of his words. The threat had been made, clear and unambiguous, but Seonhwa was not one to be intimidated. She had faced greater challenges before, and she would face this one with the same resolve. The kingdom of Silla, its future, and its stability were worth fighting for, and if she had to stand alone against the growing tide of ambition, she would do so with unwavering determination. But as she stared out into the night, Seonhwa knew that the battle ahead would be unlike any she had fought before. The winds of change were indeed coming, and it would be up to her to guide Silla through the storm. The whispers in the court grew louder with each passing day, their tones increasingly harsh, like a storm brewing on the horizon. General Kim Il-sung's influence had spread too far to be ignored. His faction, once a quiet undercurrent, was now a powerful force, emboldened by his charismatic leadership and his carefully nurtured support among the military and the nobility. For Seonhwa, the task of holding the kingdom together had become more complicated by the hour. The storm that had once been a distant rumble now threatened to break over the kingdom, and she knew that she had to act quickly. The tension between her and King Munmu had deepened. He had grown more distant in the wake of their earlier confrontation, unable or unwilling to understand the depth of the crisis within the palace walls. His mind, once sharp and confident, had grown clouded, burdened by the weight of leadership. Seonhwa could see the toll the internal strife was taking on him, and she feared that, if it continued, it could unravel everything they had built together. In private moments, Seonhwa tried to reassure him, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. King Munmu's eyes, once filled with purpose, now appeared tired and lost. He no longer confided in her as he once had, and Seonhwa was left to make decisions on her own. Without the partnership they had once shared, the loneliness of it gnawed at her, but she knew she had no choice. Silla needed her now more than ever. The court, once a place of bustling activity and noble affairs, had become a theater of shadowy alliances. Seonhwa's every move was watched, and every decision scrutinized by those whose loyalty was not so easily swayed. She had no illusions about the nature of power in the palace. It was not just a matter of bloodlines or divine right, it was a matter of influence, of whom you could trust, and whom you could bend to your will. The nobles and generals who had once sworn loyalty to Munmu were now divided. Some stood firm beside him, while others had begun to waver, drawn by Kim Il-sung's promises of a new era of leadership. They saw in him a stronger, more decisive ruler, one who could unify the kingdom under his banner and protect Silla from the growing threats on all sides. But Seonhwa knew better than to trust the general's vision. His ambitions were a clear threat to the throne, and if left unchecked, he would soon have the support of enough influential figures to challenge King Munmu's reign directly. It was clear that the kingdom could not endure the growing division for long. Seonhwa had already begun to quietly rally her supporters within the court, meeting with those still loyal to the crown and trying to rebuild the fractured alliances. The stakes were higher than ever. Every conversation, every gesture, carried the weight of their kingdom's future. One of her most trusted allies was her father, Kim Il-sung, who had always been a pillar of strength and wisdom in these tumultuous times. He had stood by her side through the battles of the past, and his counsel had proven invaluable. But even he, with all his experience, could not predict what lay ahead. The court was a battlefield in its own right, and every move they made could shift the balance of power. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over the palace, Seonhwa met with her father in the royal gardens. The silence between them was thick with unspoken concerns. Her father, once the embodiment of military discipline and strategy, now looked weary, his brow furrowed as he considered their next course of action. "I can see that Kim Il-sung's faction grows stronger with each passing day," Kim Il-sung said quietly, his voice heavy with concern. "His supporters are numerous, and his position grows more solid. But the loyalty of the people, the common folk who fought and bled for Silla, is still with the throne. We cannot let them forget that." Seonhwa nodded. "But the nobles, those who once stood with us, are slipping away. Their support is no longer guaranteed. The generals who fought alongside Munmu, those who bled for Silla, are now divided. Some look to Kim Il-sung, others still stand by us. But it is not enough. We need a decisive move. Father, we cannot let the kingdom tear itself apart." Her father's gaze darkened. "If we act too openly, we risk igniting a civil war. Kim Il-sung is not a fool. He will see any direct move against him as an act of aggression. We must play this game carefully. Seonhwa, every step we take must be calculated." Seonhwa closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had spent her entire life understanding the game of politics. But now the stakes had never been higher. Silla was on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send it tumbling into chaos. "I understand, Father," she said at last, her voice steady. "We need to act swiftly, but we must ensure that we do not fracture the kingdom further. If the people, those who stood by us in battle, see us divided, they will lose faith in the throne. The support of the people is our greatest weapon." Kim Il-sung sighed, his hands clasped in front of him. "Then we must show the kingdom that the crown is strong, that it is unwavering. We must show them that Munmu's rule is not under threat." Seonhwa nodded once more. "We will, but it is not enough for the throne to remain strong. We must also make it clear that Kim Il-sung is not the savior of Silla. He is a threat to it." Her father's expression softened. "And how do you propose we do that?" Seonhwa hesitated. The answer was clear, but the risks were immense. Her plan would require not just cunning, but precision. If she was to remove Kim Il-sung's influence from the court, it would need to be done without bloodshed, without appearing as a betrayal of the military forces that had made the kingdom strong. "We will expose him for what he truly is," she said slowly. "We will plant seeds of doubt in the minds of his supporters, make them question his motives. We will spread the word that his ambitions are not in the service of Silla, but in service of his own personal power. We will remind the people that Silla's strength lies not in military might alone, but in the unity of its people, under the rightful ruler." Kim Yushin considered her words carefully. "It is a dangerous plan. If you move too quickly, if you reveal your hand too soon, you could provoke the very thing you seek to avoid, civil war. But if we move carefully, with subtlety, we may yet turn the tide." Seonhwa's mind was already at work, formulating the next steps. She would need to gather allies from all corners of the kingdom, generals loyal to the throne, nobles who still saw the crown as a beacon of hope, and even the common people, who had fought so valiantly in the wars. She would need to craft a narrative, one that portrayed Kim Il-sung not as a hero, but as a power-hungry general, ready to destroy the very unity that had made Silla strong. It would not be easy, and it would not be without risks, but Seonhwa had never shied away from difficult decisions, and this one was no different. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Seonhwa met with key figures, carefully planting the seeds of doubt and ensuring that her message would reach the right ears. Her words were quiet, but they carried weight. She spoke of unity, of the crown's unwavering role in safeguarding Silla's future. She reminded the nobles and generals of the blood that had been spilled for the kingdom, of the sacrifices that had been made, and slowly, but surely, the tides began to shift. But Seonhwa knew that this was just the beginning. Kim Il-sung would not go down without a fight, and his supporters were still a formidable force. The storm that had been brewing was about to break, and Seonhwa could only pray that Silla would survive it. The court had never been so divided. Seonhwa felt the weight of the coming storm press against her with each passing day. Kim Il-sung's faction had grown stronger despite her efforts to undermine him. And now, the general's ambitions were no longer a whisper but an undeniable force threatening to upend the very structure of Silla. His supporters in the military had become more vocal, his promises of a new era of leadership swaying even the most reluctant nobles. But for Seonhwa, the stakes had never been clearer. The survival of Silla depended on their unity, and unity could only be maintained under the rightful ruler, King Munmu. The court's divisions were not just political, they were personal. The gap between Seonhwa and Munmu had grown wider, not just in their differences over the kingdom's future, but in their inability to communicate. Munmu, once a powerful and decisive leader, had become a shadow of the man Seonhwa had married. The weight of his kingdom's future, coupled with the pressure from his own court and the political maneuverings of Kim Il-sung, had exhausted him. Seonhwa had done everything she could to keep the balance, but she could feel that time was running out. The kingdom could no longer survive with its leaders at odds. It was clear that if Munmu could not rise to meet the challenge of his throne, the future of Silla would rest in her hands. And with that realization, Seonhwa made the hardest decision of her life. One evening, she stood in the royal gardens, gazing at the moonlit horizon. Her heart felt heavy, and yet her resolve was unwavering. The whispers of betrayal, of broken alliances, filled the air. But Seonhwa knew that she had one final chance to save her kingdom and her family. Her father, Kim Yushin, had been by her side throughout this ordeal, but even he could see that the situation had reached a boiling point. His once steady hand in guiding Seonhwa now felt uncertain, the weight of history pressing on both of them. Yet, he had always trusted her judgment. "Father," Seonhwa said, her voice steady despite the turbulence inside. "I must go to Munmu. I must remind him of who he is, of the man he once was, and the king that Silla needs him to be. If we do not act, all that we have fought for may be lost." Kim Yushin nodded, his face grim. "You are right, Seonhwa, but remember, the king's heart has not been the same since the days of war. If you are to rekindle that fire, you must be careful." His wounds run deep emotionally and politically. To push him too hard may lead him to retreat entirely. But to do nothing could destroy Silla. Seonhwa nodded, acknowledging the immense responsibility she carried. She knew that this would be the defining moment, the one that would either forge a new beginning for Silla or shatter it irreparably. The next morning, Seonhwa summoned King Munmu to a private audience. The air was thick with tension as he entered the chamber, his eyes weary, his posture sagging with the burden of a king whose authority was under siege. Yet, even in his fatigue, he was still the ruler of Silla, the man who had stood beside her through the trials of their early reign. Munmu, Seonhwa began softly, her voice filled with both concern and determination. We can no longer remain in the shadows of doubt. Silla needs you, your strength, your vision, your leadership. The court is divided, and Kim Il-sung's influence grows by the day. You cannot allow this kingdom to slip into chaos. King Munmu's eyes flickered with a brief spark of recognition, but his gaze quickly hardened. Seonhwa, he replied, his voice strained. I know what is at stake, but I am tired. The weight of this crown, it has become too much for me. I fought for Silla, but what am I fighting for now? The very people I once trusted have turned against me. Even you, my queen. You no longer see me as the ruler I once was. Seonhwa felt a pang of sorrow at his words. She had not wanted this moment to come. She had not wanted to push him further into the depths of doubt. But now, there was no turning back. I never stopped seeing you as the ruler you were, Munmu, she said, her voice firm but filled with an underlying tenderness. But a king's strength is not measured by the weight of the crown alone. It is measured by his ability to guide his people through the storm. Silla needs you now, more than ever. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Seonhwa could see the pain in his eyes, the remnants of a man who had been broken by the constant struggles of leadership. But then, something in his gaze shifted, a flicker of the man she had married, the man who had once fought with such fierce conviction. You are right, Seonhwa, Munmu said at last, his voice quieter, but no less resolute. I have been lost for too long, but no longer. If Silla is to survive, I will not be the one who lets it fall apart. Seonhwa's heart swelled with relief, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The struggle would not be over until Kim Il-sung's influence was decisively broken, and until the unity of the kingdom was restored. Over the following days, King Munmu and Seonhwa worked together to reassert the authority of the throne. They reached out to loyal generals and influential nobles, reminding them of their oaths to the kingdom and the crown. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Kim Il-sung's supporters, who had once seemed so powerful, began to falter. His promises of a new order fell flat as the people of Silla, both commoners and nobles alike, reaffirmed their loyalty to the throne. The final confrontation came in the palace, where the factions collided in a tense standoff. Kim Il-sung, sensing that his position was no longer secure, made one final, desperate attempt to seize power, but the loyalty of the people to their king and queen was unshakable, with the support of the military and the nobility still faithful to Silla's legacy. Kim Il-sung was forced to step down. In the aftermath, Silla was restored to a fragile peace. The kingdom was far from free of challenges. There would always be those who sought power for themselves, but Seonhwa and Munmu had weathered the storm. Together, they had secured the future of their people, and the kingdom could now look forward to a new dawn. Seonhwa stood beside her husband on the balcony of the palace, the rising sun casting its warm light over the kingdom they had fought to preserve. The future was uncertain, but they faced it together, united, as the rulers Silla needed. I am proud of you, Seonhwa, King Munmu said softly, his voice filled with quiet admiration. You saved us all. Seonhwa smiled, her heart filled with a quiet strength. We saved Silla together, Munmu. That is all that matters. As they looked out over the kingdom, Seonhwa knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but with the throne secure, and their bond stronger than ever. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the heart of Silla, the queen and the king had stood against the storm and had emerged victorious.